Hey guys! Today I wanted to start off my series of class showcases with the Male Slayer class, Weapon Master. I'll be covering things like general playstyle, tips and tricks for some notable skills, talisman recommendations, some example rotations, and maybe some gearing guidelines for endgame optimization. To start, Weapon Master is a very solid and flexible synergy class and deals physical percentage damage, meaning he scales with the physical attack stat. And he applies synergy via his First Awakening passive Iron Strike, which applies a debuff to all enemies hit for 30 seconds, increasing the amount of critical damage they receive from party members. And of course, if you're in a party of 2 or more, the Weapon Master will also benefit from the synergy effect himself. The class can actually deal an extraordinary amount of single target DPS thanks to his ability to wield a lightsaber, and also lightsaber license, granting you an attack speed bonus and additional cooldown reduction. However, he does have a limited amount of AoE, not a lot of skills with AoE. Draw Sword, Lightning Draw Sword, Ultimate Blade Dance Lightning, Mind Sword are pretty good, Raging Dragon Slash is kind of okay. So this can make clearing large rooms of enemies something of a hassle. But overall, he's a very solid class, very flexible, very straightforward, not too difficult to play later on. So let's just dive straight into skills. Flowing Stance. And Flowing Stance is actually probably where most people have some challenge with the class. And basically you press this button, it's on shift for me, and you enter the stance. And you can see all my skills are grayed out. And you can only do a couple things here. So you can perform any of these Flowing Stance skills, as well as this buff called Flowing Stance Force. And to perform Force, you just press skill 2 or space by default, and you'll get this buff. It has no duration, it's infinite, so you just cast it once alongside Overdrive, and this will last the entire dungeon or until you die and revive. And you can also press Flowing Stance again to leave Flowing Stance. You can actually cancel into Flowing Stance from Drive Slash, from your basic attacks, from your Secret Sword Art, and Thrust, and technically Flipside Counter, which I can't perform until I get back attacked, but don't worry about it. Starting with the first skill, Clash. Clash is actually a forward thrust. You can actually hold back to not travel at all, not press anything, and you'll travel a little bit, or press forward, and you'll go a greater distance. And the damage is okay. The DPS is very high on paper, but it's got a very low cooldown, and you just won't be able to make use of it enough. So generally speaking, you'll leave it at level 1, or you can dump some points into it if you want. But also, if you are not using a bludgeon, you can use a skill in the air by jumping, and you can actually see Flowing Stances lit up while in the air. If you press Flowing Stance, you'll actually perform an aerial clash, diving to the ground. And later, when you get Hypervigilance, your Second Awakening passive, you get Super Armor in all stance skills. So having Super Armor on the way down is kind of nice. If you use Zanbato or Short Sword, you actually get an additional attack by pressing Z after the thrust. And this is actually, again, okay. It's not great. But you can, like, thrust out of it, or you can even, like, Drive Slash out of it. And of course, you can also chain into other stance skills, which I'll go over later. Moving on, we have Swift. Swift is also a skill you perform in Flowing Stance by pressing your jump key, which is C by default. You can jump just straight forward, up, or down. And the jump itself is whatever. You can use it to get out of a hairy situation, but generally speaking, what you want to be doing is pressing your jump key again, or your basic attack key, at any point during the leap, and you'll perform this downward slash. And you can use it at any point before you land on the ground. You can use it immediately, use it at like point blank range, or from far away, like this. And this is just really, really good DPS, very, very short animation, very, very handy to have. And you will want to max that. Rise is another skill you will absolutely want to max. The range is very limited, however. It is a upward stab that leaves you in the air. But as you can see, the range is not amazing. And you can see I'm actually missing some hits. With lightsaber, you get a couple hits here. like that. But it does leave you in the air, and this can be kind of dangerous sometimes. But you can clash to safety, forward or backward. You can also use Ash Fork if your clash is on cooldown, which is a little bit less safe, but that's fine. But also, more importantly, once you get your Hypervigilance passive and have Flowing Stance Force active, you can actually start chaining your Flowing Stances together. So instead of doing Swift, and then waiting, and then re-entering Flowing Stance to do Rise, what you can do is, you can perform Stance, and just mash Z, or just press Z, really, after Clash, and you'll automatically perform the Rise after. So a very common combo you'll see is Swift, Rise, and then Clash of Safety. Or you can do, like, Swift, Flash, Rise, or Flash, Swift, Rise, Ash Fork, whatever. You can do whatever you want, and most importantly of all, just because you do a Swift doesn't mean you have to follow it up with a Rise. If the boss is about to swipe you, and you'll be, you know, putting yourself at risk, just don't Rise. Just run away. It's not worth the DPS. And that covers that. Moving on to Draw Sword. This is something new that was added very recently, but if you're using a lightsaber or a katana, you can actually just double tap your Draw Sword key, and the second slash will actually just be buffered. So you don't have to worry about timing your second slash or anything like that anymore. Just press it twice, they'll both come out. Illusion Sword Dance, something that some players don't know is that if you read the skill, you'll actually see that you can actually mash the key, perform additional slashes, and also increase the damage of the finisher, the Spirit Sword finisher. So basically, you should always mash your key. Also, if you can tell, it's got a long animation. If you don't have a lot of attack speed, this could take a long time, especially if you're hitting multiple enemies. You can actually cancel this skill into the finisher by switching weapons. And it'll just automatically perform the finisher, and technically speaking, it'll reduce the animation time, and therefore, you can get to safety. This isn't really that useful, because generally speaking, it's still going to take a while, but maybe this could save your life. Who knows? Apart from that, we have Lightning Draw Sword. Just a couple things about this skill. It does have a blind spot for small targets. You'll see, you know, it's a very like large AoE, but you'll see here if I cast it all, you know, with my back turned away from the enemy, that actually landed. That also landed. It's got a blind spot somewhere. Wow, hello? There we go. So it's got a blind spot. So generally speaking, what you want to do is actually use it while facing the enemy at all times. And you can't be off axis, but there's actually also two bits of this, right? Two parts. There's a melee physical weapon hit that does more damage, and a ranged projectile hit that does less damage. And the range of this is about the same, or is exactly the same in fact, as your base draw sword. So you'll see here, it does 67,800 damage, but if I step a little bit further away, it does only 61,000 damage. So if you can help it, always use it in melee range. One last thing about Lightning Draw Sword is if you actually pay attention to my hotkeys, you'll actually notice that Draw Sword lights up before any of my other skills. You can actually queue that up and buffer into Draw Sword. And that can save a little bit of animation time. It's only a couple frames, but it's pretty nice when you can do it. Moving on to finally your second awakening, Telekinetic Swords. This is pretty self-explanatory. You get these blades on your back. As you attack, certain skills, it'll actually even list them, will shoot out these swords. For example, if you use Charge Burst, all 5 swords will actually fly out, like this. And then Illusion Sword Dance, only 4 of them will. Mind Sword, also only 4 of them will. And then, you know, your stances will shoot these out as well. And this is just tick damage. It does actually add up pretty quickly. But as you see, as it expires, it automatically just targets the strongest vulnerable enemy in the room and performs a super hold finisher. And of course, while it's on your back, you can also just press the hotkey again, and it'll also do this finisher. Timing this is somewhat important because if there is no enemy, or if the enemy is iframed, it will just spawn in front of you. And you can strategically place this before an enemy becomes vulnerable, technically. The finisher will not follow an enemy that moves. And lastly, if the blades are not on your back, you can actually press the hotkey again, and it'll automatically bring them to your back. And after 5 seconds, you'll see this pulsing, and it'll just automatically fire off. And of course, you can also manually trigger the finisher at any point during those 5 seconds. And that's really about it. You can actually use this super hold to cheese quite a few bosses in the game, most notably Vita and Nex in Sirocco Raid. If you actually perform the finisher during the black loading screen as you enter the room, you can actually skip their initial phase where you walk to the other side. That's kind of not amazing. It's okay. Apart from that, First Awakening is actually pretty self-explanatory as well. If you just let it go, it super holds for quite a long time. But let's say you want to do damage instead, you can actually speed this up by mashing your basic attack key. Way faster, but it still super holds. But something that not a lot of people know is if you actually use it during flowing stance, it does not hold enemies. And now you can actually get counter damage on this if the enemy is casting a skill or attacking or whatever. Generally speaking, this is not going to be useful, but it can be. And that's about it for skills. I will actually talk about Hypervigilance real quick, actually. Hypervigilance will actually change Raging Dragon Slash, for example. From just a normal dash, it'll have these red twisters that follow you, that deal damage. Illusion Sword Dance will have these black shadows that attack alongside you. Charge Crash does get this shockwave, and again, Flowing Stance gets super armor on these skills, pretty cool. Apart from that though, you'll also have Shooting Star. If you press your basic attack key during the skill, you'll actually drop these Thunder Swords that super hold enemies, and you can drop up to 3. And you can actually control where it drops by going left or right, not up or down though. And one more point about Hypervigilance is that if you actually notice, Illusion Sword Dance, the black shadows that attack alongside you are actually calculated into Hypervigilance's damage and not ISD's. So don't be like, oh wait a minute. Wait a minute. Illusion Sword Dance is so weak. Mind Sword is way stronger. Flash Cut is way stronger. You gotta add these together, because this is one skill. So this is what? That's like 68,000 damage, almost 70,000 damage. That's almost as strong as my level 80 skill. And ISD is in fact one of your strongest skills per cast. Same with Raging Dragon Slash. The red twisters will also be counted as Hypervigilance, and not Raging Dragon Slash. So you gotta add these up together as well. And that's about it. And next I want to go into Talismans now that I've covered those two skills actually. I'm gonna go back to town real quick and show you my recommendations. Starting from the back, we have Draw Sword. This is probably, in my opinion, his most important talisman. Some people do drop this just for raw damage instead, but I think the utility it gives is just irreplaceable. And then Raging Dragon Slash, and my personal recommendation is Illusion Sword Dance. However, a lot of people actually use Mind Sword Talisman just for raw damage. It doesn't give a lot of utility. The extra range is okay, it's nice, but I don't need it. Illusion Sword Dance does give increased range, which is very, very nice. Also gives 90% damage reduction for the duration of the skill, so you can actually use it to tank hits, even in end game. But naturally, the increased range is really the main highlight. And let me show you, first of all, let me show you Draw Sword, which was pretty slow before, but now you'll see it gives 30% reduced preparation time. That's the precast delay. And now it comes out way faster. And also you'll see it increases your attack range by 20% once you get your runes in. And it's way bigger. So you can use that to your advantage for clearing a room. It's also technically your highest DPS talisman. And another bonus is you'll see at the bottom, it casts Deft Grip on a hit. You'll even see it. Deft Grip is a passive. It's basically an upgraded rapid weapon switch. And every time you switch weapons from one weapon to a different weapon type, you'll actually get a 15% attack speed and move speed buff for 15 seconds, and do a tiny amount of damage. This is really inconsequential. But this speed is very nice. But it means you have to switch weapons, right? And you don't always want to be switching weapons, and a lot of people don't have 2 weapons to switch to. However, if you have the Draw Sword Talisman, it'll automatically cast Death Grip anytime you land it. So you can basically have 100% uptime and a speed bonus, and that's really nice. Moving on to the Raging Dragon Slash, this is really just a flat-out damage increase, but the cool thing about this is that the Twisters are actually now homing. They'll just go after the strongest enemy in the room, generally speaking, and a lot of the damage from the dash gets put into the Twister. Now let's say, for example, you're fighting a boss that's attacking constantly, there's a lot of explosions, and it's not safe to attack for a while, and you want to get some damage in before he goes away. You can do this. You could just miss the dashes. And obviously you will lose out on a lot of damage. About half the damage, in fact. But if you didn't have an option to hit it anyway, you can just do this. Just for some free damage. That's pretty nice. But also the AoE is also very nice too, for clearing a room. If you can gather an enemy or a group of enemies with like Charge Burst and then Raging Dragon Slash, that's pretty pog. And then finally, Illusion Sword Dance, again, the increased range is very nice. Now, increased range might not seem like an amazing thing, but what actually happens is that because of the increased range, even the finisher, it is way easier to land all 3 hits of your finisher. So that was 3 hits. If you use it at point blank range, only 2 will hit. And from this range, even at this range, without the talisman, you get 2, but with the talisman, you get 3. And that's pretty nice. And of course, with the talisman, you can use it from way further away. Get some breathing room. Very pog. That's it for talismans. You can also use things like Flash Cut, or I'm sorry, Ultimate Blade Dance Lightning. This is kind of not amazing. The damage increase is huge. And the cancel thing is kind of cool. Basically, when you use a skill and you cancel into another skill, it'll automatically turn you around. So it'll look like that. That's kind of cool. It kind of opens up some combo opportunities, but generally speaking, it's not really gonna make or break the character or the skill. Then you have Lightning Draw Sword. This is actually kind of underrated. It's pretty nice, but you also don't really need it. This is really useful for farming, especially like dungeons with large rooms of enemies, but honestly it's just not really necessary for endgame. Shooting Star, you should basically never take this. Shooting Star on paper is actually very strong, but that's if you can get all the hits in, and in endgame, things are not going to stay in this tiny AoE. Even with the talisman making it a little bit faster, it's just not worth the animation time and the unreliability. If it's the only talisman you have, maybe you can try it. But it's not fantastic. That's it. And of course, I talked about Mind Sword earlier. If you have this, very, very solid talisman. You can drop Draw Sword, or Illusion Sword Dance, or even Raging Dragon Slash for this talisman if you'd like. But personally, I don't really need this. I would rather have these. Example rotation now. Let me do a quick rotation. 30 seconds. No speed. No consumables. You can see I have no gear. I don't even have an epic weapon equipped right now. I do have rare avatars, but I don't get a lot of speed actually. So don't worry about that. And yeah, let's do it. Some key things. Obviously, both buffs, Overdrive, and Flowing Stance Force. As soon as I hit the timer, I'm going to be casting Second Awakening. And a couple things before that, I'll be using Mind Sword twice, because the cooldown is less than 30 seconds, 28 seconds even. And I can precast it by a little bit, So I can get 2 of these in one rotation. I'll be using Draw Sword very, very early, so I can get 3 of these in one rotation. I can only get 2 Raging Dragon Slashes, so I don't have to use it too early. But also pay attention to how I space my floating stances and how often I use them. That's about it. Let's do it. So Mind Sword, Draw Sword, stances, boom boom. Both Awakenings. While the third Awakening is happening, I shoot out my second Awakening, just because it's convenient. You don't have to. You can do it earlier, or even later. And that's what a example rotation would look like. Again, you can see Mind Sword hit twice, Draw Sword hit 3 times, and Hypervigilance is very high. It's number 5. A passive is. And you'll see IST and Raging Dragon Slash are down here. But this did actually about 26. So it's like right there. Right underneath Draw Sword. Still a very, very strong skill. And then once you get some epics, maybe even just something like this with Dawn. And that's the only cooldown reduction I have, technically speaking. And of course the Lightsaber Mastery. And then of course if you have a Mind Stem active for increased cooldown reduction, you can do some silly things like double ISD. And double Flash Cut, double Lightning Draw Sword, etc. So let me show you what a rotation here would look like. I am not swapping pets, just consumables here. Gonna give myself about 60% speed. There it is. And you can see I did 4 Draw Swords in that rotation, 2 Flash Cuts, 2 Lightning Draw Swords, 2 Mind Swords, 2 ISDs, 5 sets of stances with just Dawn. With just 1 set of cooldown reduction. And that was kind of comfortable. Wasn't like super tight. Generally speaking, not that hard. Mechanically, at least. Gear recommendations now. I do think 1 source of cooldown reduction is very nice. If you have Time Traveler Mythic, I think that's all the cooldown reduction you need. You can still go Assassin with this, but most people will go Gatekeeper. You can use Dawn like I am now. You can use things like Dust Traveler or whatever. But I think 1 source is enough. You can go for 2 sources of cooldown reduction, but you just have to realize that you may have to either change your build, or you'll have to be a lot faster, basically. You'll be very, very busy. You'll be spamming skills left and right, Draw Swords, Swift Rise all the time, Raging Dragon Slash. You don't really have a lot of breathing room. So because of that, I don't really recommend more than 1 source, unless it's just Time Traveler, because it only gives you 10% cooldown reduction. Apart from that, Gatekeeper is very good, specifically because Starry Ocean is a weapon, and this gives 10% bonus water and 10% bonus light damage, which is basically the same thing as 20% bonus elemental damage, and that means it scales with your elemental damage stat. And look at that, Gatekeeper 3-piece gives you 90 elemental damage every 5 seconds for 1 element at a time. And that pairs very, very nicely with Starry Ocean. In fact, with my current setup, I have ADP Mythic, so I'm using 5-piece, that's 12% bonus LE damage. I'm using Dawn 3-piece, that's another 10%, and then I get another 20% from Starry Ocean, and I have a lot of LA damage here. As soon as you get the water, you'll see, there it is, 555 water damage. My bonus damage is through the roof when I'm on water. I'm not using all LA enchants because I do want to move away from Gatekeeper, but 176% bonus damage even. But again, Gatekeeper is very, very good just for raw damage, and even Even without any cooldown reduction, he does have enough just because he uses a lightsaber, so you may not need it. But it's worth thinking about. For Sirocco sets, I would say, again, Gatekeeper Assassin at the top. Rhodos is actually pretty good if you want to use a katana. You don't have to go lightsaber, for example. Taiji Emperor Swords is actually a very solid weapon, and Rhodos can offset the penalty. Later on, it'll be a little less useful when you have access to Ozma epics, but early on this can be a life changer. I'd say Nex is actually very good. It's a very good budget option. You can save a lot of money because you don't need to go the expensive all elemental damage enchants. Obviously doesn't really give you any utility. And lastly, Roxy is probably the worst set on him because his awakenings are not very strong. His third awakening, if you have a Deus to swap to, is okay. As you can see, it did about 21% of my damage in that rotation. That's pretty strong, but again, it's not a significant amount of damage in the grand scheme of things. But if Roxy is all you have, by all means. But eventually you'll want to swap to Gatekeeper or Assassin, depending on your setup. And that's about it. To recap, Weapon Master is a very solid synergy class with very high damage output and a decent amount of utility. Very, very fast-paced, very engaging. I feel he's very rewarding to play, so if that sounds like something you'd enjoy, please give him a try. And that about wraps it up. If you have any questions about Weapon Master, please drop a comment. You can also join my Discord. I'll leave a link to that in the description. You can also follow me on Twitch. I stream almost every day at usually 5 p.m. Pacific, sometimes 6, sometimes 7. And that's it. Hopefully you learned something. I hope this will be of use to you. Cheers!